So everyone, so just to present myself, I'm Renaud and I'm working at the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, IDDRI, in Paris. And now we're going to go for a session about lessons from impact evaluation in the conservation sector and beyond. And we have two speakers to speak about it. First, we have Madeleine Bottrill from CIRAD. She's director at Monitoring and Evaluation. And then we have Philippe Davies from the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. So I guess we have two presentations of 20 minutes each, and we'll be very strict. There will be no extra time. And after that, we'll have discussion. After each presentation, we'll have discussion, and then we'll get an open discussion just afterwards. Thank you very much. So, Madeleine, if you want to start.
Thank you very much. Is that microphone working all right?
Yeah, it is now.
Okay, great. Perfect. Well, thanks everybody, and thank you very much to the organisers, Jan and Esteve, for inviting me to participate. This has been a really rich few days of discussion, and I've learned a lot from the case studies that were presented over the last 2 days, so I really appreciate the opportunity to come here. And I guess similarly to Nigel, who spoke this morning, I've very much gone through a thought process over the last 3 days, and I think this presentation has evolved. And I've sort of been revising the slides and trying to reflect some of the discussions and points that have been raised over the last couple of days as my thinking's changed. And I'm going to throw up a few ideas really, and I'd love some reactions from people. What I thought I'd cover in the next 20 minutes was I wanted just to sort of set impact evaluation in context of our broader monitoring and evaluation efforts at CI, and I'll introduce just a couple of case studies which we've already heard more detailed accounts of in the sessions over the last 2 days. And then I want to sort of think more about some of the lessons we've learned to date and challenges we've encountered and what that means for how we can integrate impact evaluation into our work. And I'm going to sort of throw out a straw man idea for a model for further impact evaluation and how CI might think about integrating impact evaluation further and adopting it. And then I guess I wanted to leave with a few opportunities, some ideas I had of maybe how this community, we might engage and collaborate in the future. So similar to Colby, we now have a requirement that we need to make sure we have people on all of our slides rather than just animals. And since several years ago, about 4 to 5 years ago, CI shifted our mission from a broader perspective from beyond biodiversity, but really trying to understand the contribution of natural ecosystems to human well-being. And as part of that mission, we really build on a foundation of science. A lot of CI's work is in partnership. We work with hundreds of different partner organizations, from local NGOs to research institutes and government agencies across the countries we work. And a lot of our work is around demonstrating in situ, in the field, different types of conservation interventions with the aim of sort of amplification and trying to achieve healthy, sustainable societies in the countries we work. And we work across a broad set of countries. We have offices in 25 different geographies, as well as partnerships and other projects in a further 60. And as you can see, it's primarily across, with an emphasis on tropical regions. So our model for implementation is based really around combining scientific innovation, which a lot of it emerges from the division in which I'm in, the Moore Center for Science and Oceans. And this is about trying to test new approaches, generate new data sets, and then working with policymakers and other types of agents of change, including the private sector, to amplify these initiatives into broader application. And I think this is where a real opportunity for impact evaluation could come in where we want to replicate and really demonstrating and sort of helping test some of the different design options that we have. So, and within these approaches is our overarching theory of change as an organization, that we implement interventions that sort of sustain or improve healthy ecosystems, and that these will generate ecosystem services upon which human well-being will sort of underpin. So trying to understand how ecosystems can benefit human well-being. And the systematic map initiative that I discussed in my poster presentation is very much trying to understand what is that causal relationship between ecosystems and well-being, and what is the role of ecosystem services in contributing and providing these assets that upon which vulnerable populations in particular rely. So our kind of slogan or tagline for a lot of our work since our mission shift has been people need nature to thrive. And because the focus of this discussion and workshop has been around forest conservation initiatives, CI has a vast array of different projects over our 25-year history that has involved forest conservation. These are just some of the examples of countries in which we work, from education in Sumatra, working with school students in understanding the way in which forests work, from conservation agreements in Sociobosque in Ecuador, as well as sort of traditionally a lot of the work that CI has done has been around understanding the baselines of biodiversity and using approaches such as rapid biodiversity assessments to identify what species are within certain parts of forest. There's just been a recent RAP in Suriname, which garnered a fair amount of media attention and a number of new discoveries to science. And increasingly, we've heard from some of the presentations a real interest in REDD+, and we are starting to do pilot projects across a number of countries, from Madagascar and Peru, for example. So this is just this isn't an exhaustive list of types of interventions that we do in forests, but as many as I can think of. And I guess it sort of represents the different roles that CI plays. So we can work both in sort of doing primary research, understanding forest status and trends, as well as we've had a long history of doing work in protected areas, both in supporting governments to establish protected areas, as well as helping communities manage those areas and doing restoration projects. We've talked a lot about payment for ecosystem services, and we've got a range of different types of work around that, as well as other types of incentive-based programs. And then also a number of different ways in which we work in forest policy, from community-level governance, and in particular we've been working a lot around rights-based approaches, involving communities and indigenous groups in decision-making, and how, what are the mechanisms needed to give people, these issues around equity and fairness in decision-making. And then, as Jonah described in his example, working a lot around international forest policy and also at national scales. So I won't go through all of this, but I think this really represents how CI plays many different roles. We're both a practitioner, we're also a donor, we do research, and increasingly we maybe are interested in being an evaluator as well. So a lot of my work since I joined CI 2.5 years ago has been trying to, with the mission shift, has been around identifying measures of success. And this is based around 4 components of CI strategy, which is based on sustaining natural capital, helping foster more effective governance systems, particularly at the national scale, then improving and more sustainable production practices and production systems, as well as really understanding that link between nature and people, and understanding human dependence on ecosystems and the extent to which people are benefiting from nature. So across these 4 components, we've identified a series of indicators, which I won't go into now because this isn't really the focus of this discussion, but would be happy to talk to anybody who's interested about the specific monitoring indicators we use at an institutional level. So more broadly, we use a range of monitoring and, to a lesser extent, evaluation approaches. And I'm thinking in terms of 5 different types of monitoring evaluation approaches based upon a paper that's just come out by Mike Marsha and co-authors that I'm also an author on, in which we've characterized different types of monitoring and evaluation approaches in these 5 categories, from status assessment to management assessment, and etc. So across these So I can't see very well on this slide because it's very little. There we go, I can see. So around status assessment, we've done a lot of work on monitoring systems in terms of understanding status and trends of both biodiversity and resource uses. And this is at different scales, from national and site scales, and we have a number of initiatives that people might be aware of, including our work in TEAM, the Tropical Ecological Assessment and Monitoring System, Vital Signs, which is a relatively new collaboration with the Gates Foundation, which is looking at agricultural monitoring across a number of African countries. So Michelle has been engaged in our work there in Rwanda, for example. I mentioned RAP, and then also recently the launch of the Ocean Health Index, which is looking at the status of ocean health, both at a global scale and now increasingly at national levels. Around management assessment, we've just last week have baseline protected area management effectiveness scores for all CI sites, which is a significant accomplishment for us. And this has been using the IUCN's management effectiveness tracking tool and the requisite MPA scorecard. So we now have a baseline in all CI sites of management effectiveness. So this will, hopefully we'll be updating this annually and tracking the effectiveness of management in protected areas where CI is engaged. As predictable, we do a lot of work around outcome monitoring, and I guess in terms of the evaluation component of that is more around reporting than what we would specifically call, a rigorous evaluation. And in terms of monitoring, this work I mentioned I've been doing on institutional metrics is around creating national dashboards for all of our programs, and this is combining information, tracking indicators annually across those four main components of our strategy. Our programs also spend a lot of effort on donor reporting and evaluation, and that's more around compliance than outcome or impact evaluation. For example, complying with USAID's performance monitoring plans and results frameworks. And then around outcome monitoring, we also have a lot of, our individual projects and sites are doing a lot of their own monitoring and collecting data, and that's more on, in terms of observational studies, and I'm trying to understand the effects. And then, as I mentioned in my poster presentation, we're increasingly starting to use tools such as systematic review and mapping. We've done a number of maybe non-systematic reviews and meta-analyses, but these will also inform our decision-making and generate information that we can use for monitoring and evaluation. But to date, there's been very limited application of impact evaluation. So, really among, this is, if you were going to try and look at the relative distribution, we'd have this huge amount of effort around both status assessment and around outcome monitoring, and it would be as tiny as a speck around impact evaluation, and also, around using systematic review. But this is maybe in conflict with the way that impact is communicated. So, for example, we celebrated 25 years of impact, and so there's, we talked a little bit yesterday about how there's sort of inconsistencies in the way that people talk about impact, particularly in communicating to donors and to the broader public about the work that NGOs do. And I spend a lot of time educating different people about words and meanings in monitoring and evaluation, and what is an outcome and what is impact, and it's used for different means. And so I think Philip raised a point yesterday about how impact's often really referred to around results-based reporting. So thinking now about our current perspective on impact evaluation and the experiences we've had today, as I said, CI plays many different roles. And so really around impact evaluation, we've had work, we've looked at work around using impact evaluation for research to inform broader policy and practice beyond just specifically what CI is doing, but what's interest to national and global policy and sort of key global initiatives. We've also used it, starting to use it and think about it in terms of measuring the impact of our programs and specific interventions. And then also, in terms of systematic review, is synthesizing evidence from existing impact evaluations to inform our work, to help us guide priorities and investments and understand, which interventions should we be using and how should we design them. So I'm just going to very lightly talk about a couple of examples So I'll just mention Jonah's work on the impact of Indonesia's moratorium on global emissions. And I just wanted to highlight another case study, which I won't go into detail, about how we might use some of the econometric tools that are associated with impact evaluation for also in research and work that Mark Steinager and Fabio Godoy and a number of others have been working on around modeling future land use change under RED. And this is trying to predict future deforestation rates and the distribution of deforestation and land use change in the absence of RED, plus in the future. So, and this is based on past and present forest cover. And so they've been doing quite a significant amount of analysis on RED, but I think it sort of relates to some of the topics we're talking here. And then also talking about the case study that Louise went into detail, which CI hasn't been involved in. And then just to highlight, but I won't go into, is we're also, the work that I mentioned in my poster on this upcoming systematic map. And there are a number of different meta-analyses and reviews that we've done on various interventions and processes, such as fisheries management tools. So I think I wanted to think about case studies in a slightly different way than those that have been presented the last 2 days. So people are very much focused on methods and sort of in talking about specific effects and results from those case studies. And I think I wanted to take a broader perspective and understand a little bit about, because we're talking about policy today, is understanding what are the types of interventions that we're doing as part of our impact evaluations, and understanding what has been the impetus for that evaluation, where does the funding come from, what has been the makeup of the project team, and some of the enabling conditions that allowed for that impact evaluation to occur. So understanding what are the processes that have enabled us to have an impact evaluation, and I think this is understanding some of the conditions for evaluation. And then I'll just briefly touch on some of the challenges and the uptake of evaluation results. So this is just based on Jonah's work. So the impetus of this has been, was the validation really claimed by this landmark policy. So there was a significant policy at the national scale in Indonesia, and it was really, and this is, was, purported to have a significant effect on the emissions reduction targets for Indonesia. And Jonah, you might want to elaborate on this in the discussion time, but the funding source has been the Packard Foundation and building upon existing grants and work that Jonah was already involved with an existing group of partners. And so the implementation agency for the moratorium was the Indonesian government, and CI was acting as an evaluator in terms of from a research perspective. And so just from my brief discussion with Jonah, we were just sort of talking a bit about what were some of the enabling conditions for exploring this evaluation. And that, and Jonah mentioned there was already existing data available from some of the modeling work that he's been doing using OSIRIS and other analyses. And there was also an established partnership with Woods Hole and other key collaborators, both in the research community and in the Indonesian policy context. And also CI had a role already in an established relationship in Indonesia as a trusted advisor, and sort of had been involved in Indonesia climate negotiations. So it was appropriate that we understood some of the context and were able to interpret the results within that context. And then in terms of the uptake of evaluation findings, I know Jonah's just now been presenting this work and will be, publishing it early in the new year, so that, in the peer review that will be out there, but, I'm sure there'll be a number of other mechanisms to distribute that information to key decision makers. So then in terms of the example from Louise gave with the social impacts of MPAs and the Bird's Head seascape, and this has been around an evaluation that WWF has led with UNIPA, the Papuan University, of a CI project. And so the impetus, as Louise mentioned, was this is part of one of the largest conservation grants, which is the Coral Triangle Initiative. And funding was primarily from the Walton family, and the implementing agency was, has been CI and CI Indonesia in collaboration with our local government partners. And WWF has acted as the evaluator. So some of the enabling conditions for getting this impact evaluation off the ground has been recognition by the donor that M&E was required, and the program officer at the Walton Foundation said that we should be allocating a minimum of 10% of our budget to M&E. And I think one of the things that helped this specific approach to the M&E of the program was framing the research on impact as part of better management, not just saying it was research for research's sake. And for us, it was involving an informed partner like WWF that we worked closely with in the region to conduct the evaluation, which I think both gives CI, gives the results greater impartiality, rather than if CI had led the effort and then reporting results, there would be issues about trust and bias if we were to lead that. But having someone like WWF that understands the context and that we can work closely with and to interpret the results, has many benefits for us. And as Louise mentioned, having collaboration with the local university, UNIPA, and hopefully this will help foster the uptake of the evaluation results. I won't go too much into the challenges because Louise covered those quite comprehensively, but obviously data availability and quality to establish baseline was an issue. And then also the expense of initial baseline monitoring, so there were some limitations about what could be done. And this is just from Keith Lawrence, who's one of our project leads in the Bird's Head, and I just asked him to reflect a little bit, and he was saying, there has been a lot of monitoring, but the data hasn't been hasn't been collected and sorted as it's come in, and it would be more fruitful for further evaluation if we could coordinate those efforts and really have. And so they've now hired someone to help streamline the monitoring processes, so there's actually the data sets are there to be used down the road. And then in terms of uptake of evaluation results, this is obviously still in progress, this evaluation, but I think by involving in-country researchers from the start, this hopefully will help these results to be used and then further replicated across the CPI in the future. So just in terms of some observations to date, just from these two brief case studies, and also from the discussion over the last couple of days, I've sort of thought about, there's a couple of things that I kind of came home to me, which is, we've talked a lot about protected areas and payment for ecosystem services, which often they can either involve a policy, quite an abrupt policy change or a legal mandate. And I think a lot of the work we do is around protracted implementation. So what does that mean for impact evaluation when the implementation of activities is happening over long time frames? And Louise highlighted this in talking about finding an appropriate baseline. When do we start measuring from? Is it from when a protected area is gazetted, or when it's actually implemented, or when there's actually some type of management activities on the ground? Nigel mentioned mismatches in timeframes and the disconnect between project cycle versus observed effects. We talked about issues about external validity. We are going to use these as pilot projects, and replicating them is knowing that these can be generalized. And again, just this point of impartiality, I think it's really important for CI to be able to have someone independent come in, but someone will be, but we also have a trusted relationship with. In terms of some operational observations, there's still a really significant gap in terms of existing M&E awareness and uptake. I just mentioned issues about vocabulary, but there are many other issues of getting people really understanding why monitor and the importance of it. And our technical capacity and expertise to implement impact evaluation. I am myself and one other colleague that lead M&E for CI, so we alone couldn't really manage an impact evaluation. So I think that really demonstrates there's a strong need for research and on-ground collaboration. But there are issues about being constrained by project funding, and funding for impact evaluation is often external to the project. So we really need to be building in either additional requests or really thinking about evaluation up front when we're writing proposals. And then there's obviously, we talked about political risk, there's significant political risk to doing this. And I think there's also, we need to think about the additional set of processes and mechanisms required for uptake. So I just wanted to, I'm running out of time, so I won't go into everything, but I wanted to just to think about, well, what is our third impact evaluation adoption? We have these assumptions that an organization like CI should integrate impact evaluation. And so we really want to measure, what is the benefit, particularly if it is a cost, both in terms of effort and also this institutional change about what impact evaluation can generate. And I just wanted to kind of leave this maybe as some ideas that I have for discussion, which is around an operational model for impact evaluation. So thinking about what we as an organisation might want to develop to really integrate impact evaluation. And we've talked about relevance as having relevant evaluation questions and thinking about anticipating policy windows of when impact evaluation would be useful to initiate and funding windows to resource this. And then also having an evaluation team, so strong collaboration with researchers and technical partners. And I would really like to see, coming from this meeting, of coming away with some agreements and people that we can work with to generate some proposals for impact evaluation. And I think this really needs a continuous partnership, so rather than just when an opportunity pops up, that we kind of reach out by email to a few colleagues that we know, but really having this more as a long-term relationship. And I think this is around, and I think this long-term relationship is needed because of the way that budgets for impact evaluation are available. Like, we need people involved in initial proposal development and able to respond quickly when opportunities come up, and sort of have things ready to go so that we can respond to these funding requests. And I think one thing I just want to emphasize, and we haven't talked too much about this, but it's really about closing the loop on impact evaluation, about how we get people to use evaluation results, and the importance of engagement of decision makers in the process, and also having a very explicit strategy around utilizing results and understanding what are the mechanisms for uptake and utilization, and thinking about that political risk. So if CI is going to do an impact evaluation of getting the mechanisms in place for our leadership to respond to those results and be able to make recommendations. So I'll leave it there for now, and I do have some slides around opportunities that I'd like to discuss with you, but maybe I'll use some of the time over lunch to chat with anyone who's interested. So thank you.
Okay, so we open the floor for discussion now, just for a few questions.